Hey all, my name is Jessica and welcome back to my channel, Casa Magnolia, and today is going to be our fertility journey. So first I want to say that if you are a family member, especially a male family member, I appreciate you trying to be supportive and watch my videos, but this is not for you. So turn it off and find something else to watch. Don't make Thanksgiving awkward for yourself. Secondly, I am not a doctor, nurse, or medical professional or trying to say that what happened to me is what happens to everybody else, and every pregnancy or miscarriage is the same. I'm just telling you, or diagnose anyone, I'm just telling you what happened to me and how I felt about it. So that's thing number two. And then number three is, just so there's no confusion, I want to tell you how I'm going to describe everything. So before I had my daughter Evelyn, I had 3 chemical pregnancies while we were trying to conceive. So I'll just refer to those as my chemical pregnancies because they got no further than a tiny shadow on a strip. They were not a line. They were not a big fat positive. They were a tiny shadow that could have been they just got no further than that, if that makes sense. When I say my first pregnancy, I am talking about the pregnancy that I carried to term that resulted in my daughter Evelyn, who is almost 2 years old. My next pregnancy was one that I got pregnant in June of 2018, and we miscarried at around 6 weeks in August of 2018. So that pregnancy I'll just refer to as my miscarriage, just so there's no confusion between all the different stuff going on. And then the pregnancy that I'm in right now, I'm 19 weeks today, but I'll refer to that as my second pregnancy since I'm hoping that this will result in our second live birth, if that makes sense. So I just don't want there to be any confusion. Please don't think that that means that the baby I was pregnant with last year doesn't mean anything to me, or that the miscarriage was not important or upsetting, because it very much was. But just so there's no confusion when I'm kind of going through the timeline of everything, that's just how I'm going to refer to things so it just doesn't get too confusing. So let's get started. So my husband and I got married in summer of 2011, and I had gone back to college and was a full-time student and working full-time at the time. So we weren't really wanting to try and have a baby until after I had finished college, which I graduated in May of 2013, at which point we had also found out about 6 months before that we were going to be moving because my husband's in the military. So we found out we were going to be moving in June of 2013 from Georgia to Arizona. So our plan was for me to finish up college, we would get moved, and as soon as I found a job and we got settled in, we would just start trying. It took longer for me to get a job than expected. So we weren't trying for that first year, but we weren't preventing it. We were doing the things that you have to do to get pregnant, but we weren't actively trying. We just were trying to take it casual, thinking that it just happens. And that if we didn't worry about it, that it would just happen. So after that year, we had kind of gotten settled into Arizona more. I had found a full-time job and we were wanting to start trying. So I believe it was actually August of 2014 when my husband had gotten back from a deployment that we decided to start actively trying. At the time, I just thought, we're both healthy. I'm in my 20s. He's in his 30s. There's nothing wrong with us, that it would just happen. I started taking prenatal vitamins. I started trying to track things with ovulation strips, but I will say, looking back now, I didn't really have all the information that I could have, that I think would have let me not be as stressed about it. That's just kind of a hindsight is 2020 thing, and I'll get more into those lessons learned on my trying to conceive video next week, kind of about what I would have done differently at the time. But we were using ovulation strips. We were trying, we were doing just what we thought you were supposed to do and trying not to stress about it too much. So just with our insurance as well, I couldn't go get any help for fertility or a referral to a fertility clinic unless we had been trying for a year, which I think is pretty typical for most insurances. If you're under a certain age, if you're under 35 or haven't had any other complications or a significant amount of miscarriages and stuff like that. So anyway, what I was told is you have to have been trying for a year. Well, again, my husband is in the military, so, we had been not really trying for a year. And then by the time that we started trying, deployments and his work trips and stuff like that got in the way, that it kind of stretched it out to had been a year and a half. So at that point, we had been not worrying about it for a year and then very actively trying for a year and a half. By the time that a year and a half rolls around, you're very stressed out. You're starting to think that something is very wrong with you. And again, I knew that part of it, it had been so long because I think he had done maybe 2 deployments in that time. So again, that just draws things out. And if you're married to someone that's been deployed before, that you stress about, okay, well, I only have until this time when he leaves before I can get pregnant. Otherwise, we have to wait, 3-4 months. And it just gets to be a whole thing. And in your head, you're seeing that timeline get pushed back farther and farther. And it's very stressful. So again, that had been about 2.5 years at that point when I was finally able to get a referral to go see a fertility clinic. So I should also say not during the time that we weren't actively trying, that we were just seeing what would happen. I didn't have any pregnancies or chemical pregnancies, anything like that. Just nothing happened. During the year and a half time that we were actively trying, I did have 3 chemical pregnancies. And they were very much just like, I felt very pregnant. I think my period would end up being between like a week or 2 late, but I never got more than like the tiniest shadow on a pregnancy test. Like I would never have looked at a pregnancy test and been like, yep, that is a real serious positive. Like that is a line right there. There was just like a shadow, and then maybe the next day it would be gone. Because basically a chemical pregnancy is a very early miscarriage, where something to the effect of where, your egg was fertilized, but it didn't implant properly, so you didn't technically get pregnant. Those were very upsetting for me at the time because I kept feeling pregnant. Like I would look up these videos on YouTube of pregnancy symptoms, and I was like, yeah, I'm having that. Like I am really super bad having that. And then it would just go away and I would start my period in a week. And it was just very weird. And again, at the time, like the clinics on base just told me like not to worry about it, or it was just my imagination. I was stressing myself out too much because I never got that full line. They were just like, there's not really anything we can do for you unless you've been trying for longer. So just keep trying and see what happens. It's very frustrating to just kind of be told like you're working yourself up too much, and just to calm down and like not stress out so much. That's the quickest way to like, for someone that wants to get pregnant, to like want to punch you in the face. So that stress kind of built up over that year and a half. So by the time that I was able to get the referral, he was deployed again, and I waited until about a month before he came back to start doing all the tests, so that if there was anything that was wrong, I could get it fixed and get on medication or whatever I needed to do to kind of be prepped for when he got home. So through all the testing that they did, they found that I had an endometrial cyst on my right ovary, which was not super large, but a good size. So I do have endometriosis, and that my thyroid was low, which can cause miscarriages and infertility, and also just problems, complications during your pregnancy. So I was started on thyroid medicine, but as far as the cyst goes, he said, if it's really not painful to you and you can deal with it, it's really best not to have it surgically removed, because when we do, they're going to remove some eggs. That's just how it would work to get it all out of there. and you don't want to run the risk of removing any more eggs than you have to. You don't want to run the risk of taking any eggs away that you could use to have a baby just to get rid of a cyst that's not bothering you. So that is still there. So I have been on thyroid medicine since the time that I saw the fertility specialist. And aside from the endometrial cyst, nothing else was wrong. They did, I believe it's called an HSG, hysterosonogram. I don't know. It's basically where they put dye through your cervix so that it goes through your uterus and fallopian tubes, just to make sure there's no blockages through your fallopian tubes. I did that right before my husband got home because they did tell me that, you have a greater chance of getting pregnant that month. So I waited until right before he got home from his deployment to do that. But there was no blockages or anything, just the cyst. So I felt a lot better because I was like, okay, obviously there was something wrong. It wasn't just my imagination. Now, I can kind of address it and know what to do. I know it's not all in my head and that there's no reason that it's not happening. Like, we can kind of go from here and get a game plan. So our plan was to try on our own for 3 months after I had started thyroid medicine and see if that helped. And then we were going to go to Clomid and an IUI, which is intrauterine insemination. So I was supposed to call them when I started my period. They would calculate out when I would ovulate from the Clomid, and then they would schedule my IUI. Well, the first month of that, something happened and my husband had to go out of town and we couldn't get his sperm to do it. So we missed that month. Then the next month I called them when I started my period, and when they calculated it out, they said, oh, that's the 1 week that he takes his once a year vacation, and we don't have anybody else in the practice that can do it for you. So we'll just have to do it the next month. Well, so my very last period before I got pregnant with Evelyn was July 4th of 2016. That month we were moving out of our house, getting it ready for sale, moving everything out so that we could go into temporary lodging on base. Because we were so busy, and that was the month that he couldn't do my IUI. So I was waiting until August to do the IUI. I wasn't really even thinking about trying to get pregnant that month. We were just trying to get to my period in August so we could do the IUI, because it had been so long of doing it ourselves and nothing happening that I just thought, it doesn't matter if we try this month because it's not going to happen anyway. So we just have to get to my period in August so that we can have the IUI before we leave. Well, that was the month I got pregnant with her. We were not trying. I was not tracking anything. I did not know that I was ovulating. I think it was probably one of the last nights in our house before we moved into the lodging, temporary lodging, that it just sort of happened. My period never came. When we were in temporary lodging was when I missed my period and got all of those early pregnancy symptoms that I did not realize were early pregnancy symptoms. I was 2.5 weeks past my missed period. So I was 6.5 weeks pregnant with her by the time that I felt so sick with morning sickness that I knew we were moving in a week, and I thought, I can't get to a doctor that quickly once we get there. I have to see them now before I leave, and something is seriously wrong with me. I knew they were going to ask if I was pregnant, so I just thought, well, I'll take one so that I can tell them for sure that I'm not, so that they can give me a prescription before we leave, because I am so sick. Something is seriously wrong and I have to be seen before we leave in a few days. Well, when I took it middle of the afternoon, it just lit up like the 4th of July. I was very, very pregnant, 6.5 weeks pregnant. And so in the end of it all, we never had to do the Clomid and never had to do the IUI. It just happened that month that I wasn't stressing about it. And I hate to even say that, because not stressing about it does not mean you're not stressing about things does not mean that you're just going to get pregnant. It does not open your womb up to having a baby. But I just had so much other stuff on my plate that month that I just kept thinking, get to your period so we can do the IUI, and that period just never came. I just happened to get pregnant after 3 years of trying. I had a very normal, uncomplicated pregnancy with Evelyn. She is a wonderful child, and we are so glad to have her. And I left the hospital after we had her ready to have another baby. Like, I felt a little more confident that we could make it happen on our own, like, because obviously something was not too wrong with me. Like, I guess when you're having trouble getting pregnant the first time, I just feel like I felt, is it ever going to happen? Is there something really wrong with me that it's just never going to happen? So by the time that I had gotten pregnant and I had had a baby, I thought, okay, well, it obviously is possible for it to happen. So I felt a little more positive about trying again. I knew that I wanted her to have a sibling. And although we did not start trying right away because I just didn't feel like my body could carry another baby right away safely and healthy, we waited till she was about 6 months old, which was quicker than my doctor had recommended, but we started trying for our baby number 2 when she was about 6 months old, which was in October. Again, we thought, well, it just happened out of the blue with Evelyn, so let's just try and not worry about it too much again. So from October to about February, we were trying, but I wasn't taking ovulation strips or anything. I was just kind of listening to the cues of my body as far as symptoms and cervical mucus and stuff like that. I wasn't taking temperature. I wasn't taking ovulation strips. But I was kind of using other bodily clues to kind of know if I was ovulating or not. First couple months, we weren't really too worried about it. I just thought, everyone kept saying, oh, well, you just had a baby. Your body knows how to do it. You'll get pregnant like that. I did not. So from October to February, nothing. In March, April, May, I started like tracking basal body temperature, tracking ovulation strips, stuff like that, which again, all of that I'll get into next week with the TTC tips. We were tracking more heavily. I had gotten a lot more information about what I needed to be looking for and what we needed to do. So I did that and nothing happened. And then we did it again. We did kind of that same cycle of stuff in June, and I got pregnant at the end of June. Because I was tracking everything with a chart and basal body temperature and ovulation strips, like I had this whole graph going, I knew that I did not ovulate until day 25 with that pregnancy, which is pretty late. I mean, what they tell you, what most people think is that you ovulate is day 14. So I was way off of that. And from some of the information and books I had read, you have to have at least 10 days from your ovulation date to your period to get pregnant. You have to have that luteal phase to let everything implant and stuff. So I was a little nervous because I knew it was cutting it kind of close because I had ovulated so late, but I started getting the early pregnancy symptoms that I just kind of got the feeling that I might be pregnant because I was feeling kind of the same things that I felt when I was pregnant with Evelyn. And I found out at about 3.5 weeks, again, about 11 DPO or about 13 DPO, that I was pregnant again. So that was at the end of June, and I would have been due mid-March of this year, 2019. And if you watched my last video about early pregnancy symptoms, you'll know that with that pregnancy, I had a dream about my brother and sister-in-law having a baby, and that I was going to be pregnant too when their baby was born. When I found out that I was pregnant only a couple weeks behind her, I felt like it was really weird and I felt like something was off, but my symptoms felt fine. My lines kept getting stronger and stronger, so I kept feeling like, okay, everything's okay. My symptoms were stronger than they had felt with Evelyn. They felt more like when I had had chemical pregnancies, but the lines kept getting stronger, so I kept feeling like, okay, it's obviously okay. But still in the back of my mind, something just felt really off. I felt a little disconnected from the pregnancy, which, I don't know. With Evelyn, I just felt like I was so happy to be pregnant, and after so long, and maybe it was because I was so much further along, I just felt so immediately connected to her. This pregnancy, maybe it's that with my miscarriage, it was, I don't know if it was just kind of like a gut intuition thing, or if it was because of it was so early and the symptoms were weird and off. I just didn't feel as connected to it, but I was so excited because we had been trying. I mean, by that time, we had been trying for over 6 months. We had been trying like 8 or 9 months because we had really started trying in October of 2017. So we were actually on our family vacation to Florida when I found out that I was pregnant. When we got back home, I called up to the base to be able to get my pregnancy test confirmed with blood so that I could get a referral to my OB, which is just how it works here with our TRICARE on this base. So I was able to get in and get that. And then when I called my OB, it was going to be, I think, they didn't really want to see me until about 6 weeks because that was the earliest that they could do, that first ultrasound, because I knew I was so early. Everything kept going along fine. I was still taking tests every once in a while, and the line was still there, getting stronger. I still had some symptoms. The week before I got in to see my OB, about 3 or 4 days before, I was having pretty strong cramps, like enough to need to take a Tylenol, but not so strong that they didn't go away after taking a Tylenol. But the biggest thing was that I was having really bad back pain. And I just kind of chalked it up to the fact that I have a 15-month-old who was refusing to walk at the time. I was still having to carry her around everywhere. So I just thought, maybe this is just what it is with your second pregnancy because you have a baby to carry around all the time. But it was very painful enough to that, I felt like when I was driving, I almost had to pull my car over and take deep breaths because it hurt so bad. It was not getting better with Tylenol. But I just figured I'll ask my doctor about it when we get in and just make sure everything's okay. She'll tell me everything's okay because, that's what happened with Evelyn, and that it just is what it is. It's because I'm carrying a baby around all day long. In hindsight, when my mom asked me how I was feeling, and I did mention that my back hurt really bad, she was just kind of like, oh. And she had a miscarriage between me and my brother. And, she didn't say anything at the time, but afterwards, after I did miscarry, she said, that was the big thing that happened with me when I miscarried was my back hurt really bad. And it almost was taking my breath away. Well, anyway, so that was going on a few days before my appointment. When I got into my appointment, they redid my blood tests, and but of course I didn't get that back till a couple days later. And I went up to do my ultrasound. At the ultrasound, this is where it gets kind of confusing. At the ultrasound, before they did the ultrasound, they're going off your last menstrual cycle, which is just how we track things in, healthcare administration stuff and admitting. That's just how they kind of go off of until they have your ultrasound date. But based on my last menstrual cycle, I should have been almost 8 weeks. But I kept telling them, no, I'm really more like 6, maybe 6.5 weeks, because I know I didn't ovulate until day 25, as opposed to day 14. I ovulated really late. So I kept trying to tell them that, and they were just like, oh, okay, well, they'll be able to tell you for sure when you have your ultrasound. Well, I went up to the ultrasound, and she said that I was dating at 5 weeks and 3 days. Which at that point, you cannot see a baby. I mean, maybe for some people you can, but they could not see a baby. There was a gestational sac, and I believe she saw a yolk sac, but no fetal pole and no baby. Which it takes till mid 6 weeks to usually be able to see a baby. Again, everybody's different, but I wasn't too concerned. It freaked me out. The sonographer, of course, can't say anything to you. They just say, we'll give it to your doctor and let them know, they'll call you. But she was acting kind of weird because she kept asking, like, are you sure you're 8 weeks along? And I said, no, I'm not 8 weeks along. I'm about 6 to 6.5 weeks. And she was like, well, you're dating at 5 weeks, 3 days. She wouldn't give me any pictures of it, just because there was like nothing except a sack. And it wasn't until I got home that I really knew this was not okay, just because of how I was feeling. She also saw a subchorionic hemorrhage in there, and I don't remember the size. I had it written down, but after everything, I was kind of so upset that I threw it all away. She did have see a subchorionic hemorrhage, which I think I had started spotting maybe at that point, maybe not. When the doctor called me, they said, you do have this. It's pretty common. It's very common to see spotting with it. Usually they go away on their own, but it can increase your risk of miscarriage. But again, don't be too worried because most of the time they go away on their own. She just said, stay calm. We'll do your ultrasound in a week and see if there's any growth and see kind of what's happened with the hemorrhage. And then she also said they had gotten my blood results back, that my HCG levels did measure at around the 5.5 week point, which matched up with my ultrasound, but that I also had low progesterone, which I don't think I ever got checked when I was pregnant with Evelyn, just because we were moving. I got my ultrasound really fast with our fertility guy so that I could take those images to Oklahoma with us, but I was not like, I was around 14 weeks when I finally got into the OB in Oklahoma, just because your stuff has to transfer over, you're moving, it gets kind of crazy. So I don't really know that I ever had that checked immediately with her, but I obviously didn't have any problems because she was born and she's fine. But with the miscarriage, they did say, you have low progesterone, which a lot of doctors and nurses have said, oh, that, it doesn't really make that big of a difference. We'll just give you a supplement to like help things along until the placenta takes over. But then there's also a lot of people that have had miscarriages that say they have low progesterone. So I understand where the medical community is coming up with that, but in my case, I do feel like that had an impact on things. And, I wish I had gotten on the supplements sooner. I left the ultrasound coming home just being very upset. I remember I cried so much that I thought, if I haven't lost this baby, I've made myself so upset now that I've hurt the baby. And that's I was so concerned that I've gotten way too upset over this. 2 days after that, I started spotting. When I called the office, they just said, that's very normal because you have the subchorionic hemorrhage. We're not concerned with spotting. If it gets a bit worse, that you're soaking a pad in an hour, or then you can go to the emergency room. Because otherwise, I understand where they're coming from. There's just not really anything they can do. And they were just waiting to see if things would grow over that week. Over the course of the week, my back pain got way worse. The way that I felt about it was, it almost felt like being in early labor when I had my daughter. Not full blown, about to have the baby labor, but once things really start picking up and I was having really bad back pain during the beginning of active labor. That's kind of how it was feeling, and that was very concerning. And then, the spotting started for a couple days, and then I started bleeding, but again, it wasn't enough to be soaking a pad. So they just kept saying, we're not that concerned. We're not that concerned. The next Monday, which I think it was probably in the morning, I felt like I was passing a clot of something. And when I got up to go to the bathroom, I'm sorry, this is so gross. But I just want you to know, in case this hasn't happened to you, or it has, I did pass the sack at that time. And again, I hadn't ever had a miscarriage, so I didn't know really for sure what I was looking for to be able to tell them over the phone, but I knew I had passed like a clear membrane sac and there was other little things inside. When I called the doctor at that point, she said, okay, well, you can come in to get your HCG checked and we'll compare it to what you did, last week, just to see if it's gone up or if it has gone down. When they got the results from that, it had gone down. So she said, what you did pass was definitely a miscarriage. I was also in so much pain at that point. Like, I felt, like I said, unmedicated early labor pains that I just wanted it to be over with so that we could start again. And I know that sounds terrible and I feel bad for thinking that, but it was just such a long, like, drawn out experience that I was so tired of being in pain and so tired of being upset, and I just was like, this has to be over with. I couldn't take care of my child very well because my back hurt so bad and my cramps hurt so bad that I could just barely move. Thankfully, my grandparents came up to help us because I had to lay in bed all day. That was August of this past year, 2018, when we had that miscarriage at 6 weeks. And very thankfully, I happened to get pregnant again in September of that year, a month later. After I went to the doctor and they just made sure that my HCG was back down to 0, she said, wait till you have another period and then you can start trying again. Because I had told her, we've been trying for a long time. It took a long time to get our daughter and we want to try again. I also knew at that point that my husband had to leave on a work trip on October. So again, it just kind of pushes your timeline back. And I just kind of, I wanted to be able to try again. Anyway, so after that, I waited for my period and waited for my period. It never came. After the miscarriage, I think I bled for another 10 days until everything had finished. Yeah, I never got another period. In around the 15th of September is when I kind of got the clue from cervical mucus again. I know that's so gross, but if you're watching this video for a reason, so I'm assuming that you're trying to have a baby or have gone through this, and yeah, you should be okay with it by now. But I kind of got the clue from cervical mucus that I might be ovulating, and I just kept thinking, okay, I didn't get my period, but if we don't try and he leaves on this work trip and we haven't even tried, I'm going to be like kicking myself because we didn't try. So, we tried. The next morning I did take an ovulation test just to confirm that I was ovulating, and I was. So we did try, and I got pregnant. We found out that I was pregnant. Well, I found out the evening of September 25th, and I told my husband the morning of the 26th when I had a better test that I could show him, because the one on the 25th, like, you wouldn't have even believed it. It was just like the tiniest shadow. And so that's where we're at now. I'm 19 weeks along with this pregnancy. We're due at the beginning of June with a little girl. And I am just so ecstatic and feel so lucky. Like I said, I felt a lot of pressure for a couple reasons. One, I knew my husband was leaving in October for that work trip. I wanted to be able to try at least once, hopefully twice, before he had left for that work trip. And I just didn't want to not be able to try. Secondly, he's retiring from the military the end of June of 2019. So he's probably going to be I feel like he's going to be the first person to retire from the military with like a 3-week-old infant. But I just felt like we've got to get this moving along, like, before he retires from the military, and we don't know what the job situation or insurance situation is going to be. And again, we had already been trying with that one for so long too, almost a year, because I got pregnant in September. I just felt like, okay, I can push past this and start at least trying for this next one. But if you're not in that situation, I just feel even though I was recovered physically, there was still a lot of hurt, and clearly it still upsets me. Even though I was only 6 weeks along and I never even saw a baby on the ultrasound, I was pregnant, and I did love the idea of that person coming into our family, and it is still a loss. So don't ever feel like it's not okay to be upset about, what's happening. It is still a loss. A loss is a loss. Clearly, I still have some stuff to work through, but that's probably pregnancy hormones too. Talking here. But yes, that is my very long 6-year fertility journey. And again, I'll be giving more updates with what's going on in this pregnancy in the next couple Mommy Monday videos. Next week's, I believe, is TTC tips, which will be a much more positive video. I'm sorry this video was so long and just kind of a freaking bummer, to be honest. But that was our journey. We're very blessed to have our wonderful daughter, Evelyn, and we're so blessed and excited to have this baby coming. If you're going through infertility or recovering from a miscarriage, or, trying to have a baby, or just starting to think about having a baby, I hope this video has helped you in some way, even if it's just to realize that you're not alone. So I love you guys, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.